The piano stopped mid-note so abruptly that Ellen's sound engineer thought the keyboard had malfunctioned. One moment, Ellen DeGeneres was wrapping up her interview with a Grammy-winning artist about their latest album, her audience of 300 people swaying to the beautiful melody. The next moment, complete silence as a man in the front row stood up and said 12 words that would change everything. Music is the only time machine that actually works. I help people remember. The studio fell into contemplative quiet. Ellen's expression shifted from entertainer to deeply curious as she processed what she'd just heard from this soft-spoken man, whose eyes seemed to hold both profound sadness and incredible hope. It was Friday afternoon at the Warner Bros. Studios in Burbank. Ellen's Music and Memory special was being taped, the set decorated with vintage records, musical notes and photos celebrating the healing power of music. The energy had been exactly what producers expected. Nostalgic, uplifting, filled with stories of how music touches and transforms lives. But sitting in the front row, wearing a simple blue button-down shirt and carrying a worn leather bag filled with what appeared to be sheet music, was someone whose presence would transform this ordinary Friday into television history. 35-year-old David Martinez was a certified music therapist who had dedicated his life to using music to reach people that traditional medicine couldn't touch. What Ellen didn't know was that David carried a story that would stop her show and create the most emotional moment about love, loss, and the miraculous power of music to transcend the barriers of memory and time. David was a gentle man with graying temples that made him look older than his 35 years, kind brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and hands that moved with the practiced grace of someone who had spent decades coaxing music from instruments and memories from silence. He wore a small silver pin on his shirt collar, a treble clef intertwined with a heart, symbolizing his belief that music and love were inseparable forces. The show had progressed beautifully through its opening segments. Ellen danced through the audience with her characteristic joy, celebrating the universal language of music and its power to connect people across all boundaries. She interviewed the Grammy winner about their charitable work bringing music education to underserved communities, creating the kind of inspiring content that made good television. During the Music and Memory segment, Ellen had been highlighting the therapeutic power of music in healthcare settings. She'd spoken with several musicians and therapists about their work in hospitals, senior centers, and rehabilitation facilities. The atmosphere was both celebratory and reverent, honoring music's ability to heal where medicine alone sometimes fell short. Then Ellen noticed something that made her pause mid-conversation. While other audience members were enjoying the musical performances, David was quietly crying, not sad tears, but the kind of tears that come when something beautiful touches the deepest part of your soul. "I'm sorry," Ellen said, approaching David's row with the gentle concern that had made her beloved by millions. "I can see that our music segment is really affecting you. Would you mind sharing what's touching your heart?" David looked up at Ellen with eyes that carried the weight of countless heartbreaking and beautiful moments. He reached into his leather bag and pulled out a small weathered photograph of an elderly woman with kind eyes and a radiant smile. "This is my mother, Elena," David said, his voice steady despite his tears. "She passed away from Alzheimer's 3 years ago, but for the last 5 years of her life, I got to watch music bring her back to us, even when everything else was gone." The studio began to quiet as audience members sensed they were about to witness something profound. Ellen felt her own chest tighten as she prepared to hear about the intersection of music, memory, and loss. "David, tell me about your mother," Ellen said gently, settling into this conversation with the patience and compassion that had made her America's favorite daytime host. David's hands moved to the photograph, tracing his mother's face with infinite tenderness. "Mom was a piano teacher for 40 years. She taught me to play when I was 5, and music was the language our family spoke. When the Alzheimer's started taking her words, her recognition, her sense of who she was, I thought we'd lost her forever." Ellen felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes. "But music brought her back?" "Not completely, but enough," David replied, his voice gaining strength as he shared his story. "I became a music therapist because I couldn't save my mother, but I discovered I could visit her. Every time I played her favorite songs from her childhood, from her wedding, from when she was raising me, something would flicker behind her eyes. The cameras had instinctively moved closer, understanding they were capturing something extraordinary about the power of music to transcend the cruelest diseases. She couldn't remember my name, but when I played La Paloma, the song her father used to sing to her, she would sing along with every word. David continued. She couldn't recognize my face, but when I played the lullaby she used to sing to me, she would reach out and stroke my hair like she did when I was little. Ellen reached out and took David's hand. David, is that what you do now? Help other families find their loved ones through music? David nodded, reaching back into his bag to pull out a small digital device and a pair of headphones. I work with Alzheimer's patients and their families. I create personalized playlists based on their life histories, their important moments, the songs that defined who they were before the disease took their memories. The silence in the studio was now complete, as everyone understood they were witnessing something that transcended entertainment. I spend weeks with each family, learning about their loved one's musical history, David explained. What did they dance to at their wedding? What songs were popular when they were teenagers? What lullabies did they sing to their children? Then I use those songs to build bridges back to who they used to be. Ellen felt chills run down her spine. Does it work? Do you really bring them back? Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours, David said, his voice filled with both hope and heartbreak. I've watched a man who hadn't spoken in 2 years suddenly start telling stories about his time in Korea when I played Glenn Miller. I've seen a woman who couldn't recognize her own daughter suddenly start braiding hair when I played the folk songs her grandmother taught her. That's when Ellen made a decision that would define this moment forever. She stood up and addressed her production team with an urgency that surprised everyone. David, do you have your equipment with you today? Ellen asked. Could you show us how this works? David's eyes lit up with the kind of joy that comes from being asked to share something you're deeply passionate about. I always carry my portable setup. Would you like me to demonstrate? Ellen turned to her audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to witness something that I think will change how all of us think about music, memory, and the power of love to transcend any barrier. David stood up and began setting up his equipment, a small speaker, the digital device and headphones, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times. For this demonstration, I'd like to invite anyone in the audience who has a grandparent or older family member with memory issues to think about a song that was important to that person. An elderly woman in the third row raised her hand tentatively. My husband has dementia. He was a jazz musician before he got sick. David's face softened with understanding. What was his favorite song to play? Autumn Leaves, she replied, tears already forming. He played it on saxophone at jazz clubs for 30 years. But he hasn't touched his instrument in 2 years. Doesn't even seem to recognize it anymore. David nodded and began searching through his extensive digital music library. Music creates pathways in the brain that often survive long after other memories are gone. Sometimes hearing the right song at the right moment can unlock entire worlds of preserved experience. He found the song and began playing Autumn Leaves through his small speaker system. As the familiar melody filled the studio, something remarkable happened. The elderly woman began to cry, but she was also smiling, moving her hands as if she were conducting an invisible orchestra. He used to play this so beautifully, she whispered. I can see him on stage, so young and handsome, pouring his heart into every note. Ellen felt tears streaming down her face as she watched this demonstration of music's power to preserve and resurrect love. David, this is incredible. How many families have you helped? Over the past 5 years, I've worked with nearly 800 families, David replied. Each one teaches me something new about the connection between music and memory. But Ellen, I need to tell you something else about why I do this work. The studio waited in anticipation as David prepared to share something clearly very personal. When my mother was in her final stages, completely non-responsive, I played her favorite song one last time. David continued, his voice breaking slightly. Chilito Lindo, a Mexican folk song her grandmother taught her. As the music played, she opened her eyes, looked directly at me, and whispered, Mi hijo, my son. Those were her last words. Ellen felt something profound shift in her chest. David, music gave you one last moment with your mother. It gave us both one last moment of connection. David nodded. And I realized that if music could do that for us, it could do it for thousands of other families who think they've lost their loved ones to this disease. That's when Ellen made another unprecedented decision. She walked to center stage and called out to her production team. I want to do something special for David and for all the families dealing with memory loss, Ellen announced. But first I need to know, is Mrs. Rosa Gutierrez here today? From the backstage area, an elderly woman in her 70s slowly walked out, guided by a younger woman who was clearly her daughter. Mrs. Gutierrez looked confused and disoriented, glancing around the bright studio with uncertainty. This is Rosa, Ellen explained to the audience. David has been working with her family for 6 months. Rosa has advanced Alzheimer's and hasn't recognized her daughter Carmen in over a year. David immediately understood what Ellen was planning. He approached Mrs. Gutierrez with the gentle patience of someone who had spent years working with people exactly like her. Hola, Rosa, David said softly, setting up his headphones. I have some music I think you might remember. As David placed the headphones over Rosa's ears and began playing what was clearly a very specific song, something miraculous began to happen. Rosa's confused expression slowly transformed. Her eyes became clearer, more focused, and she began to move her head to a rhythm only she could hear. Then she began to sing, in a clear, strong voice that seemed to come from decades in the past. Rosa sang along to a Spanish lullaby, her face lighting up with joy and recognition. Mija, Rosa suddenly said, turning to her daughter Carmen with eyes that held complete awareness. Carmen, mi hija, you're so beautiful. When did you get so grown up? Carmen burst into tears, embracing her mother for the first time in over a year with full recognition between them. Mama, I've missed you so much. Ellen, who had remained composed through thousands of emotional moments on her show, found herself sobbing openly. This wasn't just about music therapy. This was about the miracle of love finding a way to transcend any barrier, any disease, any obstacle. David, Ellen said, stepping closer to the family reunion happening on her stage. How long will this moment last? It's different every time, David replied, watching Rosa and Carmen with the joy of someone who had facilitated hundreds of these miraculous reunions. Sometimes minutes, sometimes hours. But for however long it lasts, Rosa is completely herself again. Ellen made a decision that would change David's life and the lives of countless families. She walked to her desk and wrote out a check, returning to the group with a gift that would expand David's mission exponentially. David, this is for you, Ellen said, handing him a check for $100,000 to expand your work, to reach more families, to train other music therapists in your methods. But more than that, I want to create the Elena Martinez Memory Music Foundation, named after your mother. David looked at the check with amazement. Ellen, this will allow me to help thousands more families. That's exactly what your mother would want, Ellen replied. She was a teacher who spent her life helping people learn and grow. Now her legacy will help people remember and reconnect. Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out her personal business card. This has my direct number, she said, pressing it into David's hand. Because what you're doing isn't just therapy, it's resurrection. You're bringing people back from a kind of living death. And that's the most beautiful work anyone could do. As the episode concluded, Rosa was still lucid, holding her daughter's hand and asking about grandchildren she hadn't remembered in months. David sat beside them, quietly playing songs that seemed to strengthen the bridge between past and present. Today we learned that love leaves echoes that can survive any disease, Ellen told her audience. David Martinez showed us that music isn't just entertainment or art. It's a form of time travel that can bring us back to our most important moments and most essential selves. The episode aired exactly as it happened, becoming the most watched segment about Alzheimer's care in television history. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Memory care facilities across the country began reaching out to learn about music therapy programs, and thousands of families shared their own stories of music's power to reconnect them with loved ones. The Elena Martinez Memory Music Foundation, established with Ellen's donation, has since trained over 300 music therapists in David's personalized playlist methodology. The foundation has helped more than 5,000 families create musical bridges to their loved ones with memory loss. David's work has been adopted by memory care facilities in 12 countries, and his research on the neurological effects of personalized music therapy has been published in leading medical journals. But for David, the most important measure of success remains the moments like the one with Rosa, when music briefly conquers forgetting and brings families back together. 6 months after his Ellen appearance, David returned to the show with Rosa and Carmen Gutierrez. Rosa's condition had continued to decline, but the music therapy sessions had given the family dozens of precious moments of connection that would have been impossible without David's intervention. Music doesn't cure Alzheimer's, David told Ellen during his return visit, but it reminds us that the person we love is still in there somewhere, waiting for the right song to call them home. Ellen keeps a photo from that first day on her desk, David watching Rosa and Carmen embrace while music plays in the background. Next to it sits a handwritten note from Carmen. "Thank you for giving me my mother back, even if it was just for a little while." The headphones David used to play music for Rosa that day are now part of a traveling exhibit about innovative Alzheimer's care, demonstrating how simple technology combined with deep knowledge of a person's history can create profound moments of healing and connection. Today, David Martinez continues his work as a music therapist, but his approach has been revolutionized by the resources Ellen's Foundation provided. He now leads a team of specialists who work with families to create comprehensive musical biographies that serve as roadmaps back to memory and identity. Mrs. Rosa Gutierrez passed away peacefully 8 months after her Ellen appearance, but her family says the music therapy sessions gave them hundreds of additional moments of genuine connection during her final year. Carmen has become an advocate for music therapy and memory care, speaking at conferences about the importance of treating Alzheimer's patients as whole people with rich histories rather than just collections of symptoms. The song that brought Rosa back that day, Arroz con leche, a traditional lullaby her grandmother had sung to her as a child, has become something of a symbol for the power of music to transcend time and disease. David often uses Rosa's story when training new music therapists, reminding them that they're not just playing songs, they're opening doorways to preserved worlds of love and memory. Because sometimes the most powerful medicine doesn't come in a pill or injection. It comes in the form of a melody that carries us back to who we used to be. Sometimes healing means helping someone remember rather than helping them forget. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone who is losing themselves is the soundtrack to help them find their way home, even if it's just for one perfect, lucid, love-filled moment.